What's going on? It's Trending Story. If it's your first time here and you want to find out new facts that will definitely make you smarter and more well informed, make sure to subscribe and activate the notifications bell so you don't miss anything.
The amazing story of how wolves found a baby next to dead parents. What the wolves did with the baby is hard to believe. Evan was living in the village with his elderly grandfather. The boy did not remember his mother and father, and when he asked his grandfather about them, he would avoid the answer and tell him that his dad had died. Whenever the boy went out with his grandfather to the woods to wander there, they met a wolf there, where the animal approached the boy and caressed him and licked him, which made Evan think that he was a dog, and he was caressing him as well and wiping his head. But the grandfather told him one day that a wolf loved him that much. The little boy remained confused and asked his grandfather about the difference between a dog and a wolf, because they are very similar. Then the grandfather kept walking in the woods and describing the wolf to him and what the difference between him and the dog are. Grandfather Nicodim used to love his grandson a lot and considered him like his friend, as he called him Wolf since he was young. When he grew up, Ivan tried to understand why the grandfather called him that name, but the grandfather told him that he loved wolves so much, and that is why he called him that name. Two used to go to the large field that the grandfather owned outside the village, and there they plowed the land and planted vegetables, as they cut the grass in the spring and put it in a stable, so that the cows that the grandfather raised in the stable would eat it. One day the grandson asked the grandfather why he did not resemble him, in his face or in his hair, not even in the color of his hair, which shocked the grandfather and was unable to speak. The boy, who was 7 years old, felt very sad and began to blame his grandfather for not answering him for many questions, and he told him that he does not like him. The grandfather sighed and sat down and asked his grandson to sit down and started talking to him. The grandfather said that the events of the story date back to 8 years ago, when a group of Roma came to the village where he, his wife, and his only daughter live, called Murcia, where they set up a large camp there and decided to stay there until the winter passes and continue their way. Gypsies would have night parties, dancing and having fun, while the villagers would go to watch them. Marussia was among those who liked to watch the gypsies dance and sing, and one day someone approached her, a handsome, strong, and handsome young man, and tried to get to know the young woman. But she refused at first because he was a stranger to her and did not know anything about him. But as the days went by, she started talking to him and realized that he was an intelligent and sweet guy, and the two fell in love with each other. The young man was called Nicodemus, Italian of Greek origins, and he came to live in Russia since he was young. When Murcia told her parents that she loved the young man and wanted to marry him, Grandfather Nicodim and his wife refused and told their daughter that the young man would leave and would not return, and they did not want to become a gypsy because their lives were cruel and she could not cope with her. Murcia decided to meet the young woman she loved secretly and began to spend most of her time with them. When the time for the departure of the gypsy caravan approached, Nicodemus tried to persuade her to go with him, but the young woman refused and said goodbye, crying and returning to her home. The gypsies left, and Murcia remained crying in front of the door of the house. But suddenly Nicodemus stood in front of her smiling and holding a ring in his hand and asked her to marry him. The young woman felt very happy, and she went and told her 2 children, as they agreed to her marriage, and went to live in a wooden house located not far from the house of Grandfather Nicodim and his wife. Murcia and her husband were spending beautiful times with each other, and they made all the villagers talk about them. Nicodemus, despite his different shape, his hair was long and curly black, his eyes were brown, and his beard was black, but he was loved by everyone because he was an energetic, intelligent man, and he could do many things because proficient in many professions. Murcia gave birth to a beautiful boy, who looks like his father very much in his face, as they took care of him and took him with him to the forest where they went out to wander there. One day, while the couple was wandering in the woods, the father was holding his baby, who was 7 months old, in his hand, while Murcia was walking and looking for forest fruits. And when the couple reached the highway, Murcia noticed a little wolf standing in the middle of the road, while a car was speeding towards him. Then she screamed and ran to rescue him, and as soon as she carried him in her hands, the car hit her hard and left her lifeless in the middle of the road. Meanwhile, Nicodemus screamed and ran towards his wife, but another truck lost its brakes and was still creeping on the ground when its driver tried to stop it, and it hit the man. Meanwhile, both the truck driver and the car driver fled, leaving the couple to bleed there, while the little boy narrowly escaped death. The little pup also did not die, and he kept screaming there by the side of the road. Then a flock of wolves came and took a little wolf and a child and left the forest. Grandpa Nicodem and his wife kept looking for their daughter and her family, but they did not find her, and when they sought help from the villagers, they found Mercia and her husband dead, while the little boy disappeared and did not find any trace of him. Days passed and the grandparents were still looking for the boy, but they did not find him. Grandpa Nicodem lost hope and stopped looking completely, while the grandmother kept going every day to search for her grandson, as she felt that he was still alive and that he might be somewhere in the forest. A month after the accident, the grandmother went out to the woods as usual to wander there, where she was collecting mushrooms and looking to perhaps find her grandson, who began to lose hope in finding him. When Grandma got tired, she sat to rest, and then thought of going to the nearby woods to look there. The grandmother entered the neighboring forest, which is much larger than the neighboring forest of the village in which she lives, and when she reached a running river, she saw a group of wolves running and jumping there. Grandma did not want to approach those ferocious animals, but the way those wolves jumped and rotated around something in the middle made them quietly approach the animals to discover what was happening. When the grandmother looked over a large rock below, she saw 4 young pups hovering around a small child as he interacted with her and laughed at the top of his voice. The grandmother was shocked when she looked at the little face, as it was her grandson who had disappeared, as she tried to approach him to take him with her, but she was afraid because a large flock of wolves returned at that moment to the den and might attack and prey on her if she saw her. When the night fell, the grandmother returned home and told Grandpa Nicodem what she had seen. Then the grandfather decided to go the next day to get his grandson back. The next morning, the grandfather and grandmother got up early, and the grandfather took his weapon and went quickly to that place. When the two reached the den, he found the boy sleeping and 3 pups surrounding him, while the other wolves were not present. Then the grandfather took out his gun and approached the little puppies. Then he removed 2 of them and carried the boy in his hands, but the 3rd pup remained clinging to him and refused to allow the grandfather to take it. Meanwhile, the grandfather hit him with a rifle shield and dropped him to the ground, then took his grandson and asked his wife to follow him before the wolves returned. On the way, the grandfather noticed that the little wolf was pursuing him and his wife, although he tried to threaten him with a rifle several times. When the grandfather finished telling his story, he sighed and asked his grandson to approach him, and told him that he was the boy he was telling about in the story, and that the wolf who came with him to the forest was that pup that his parents helped him, Nicodemus and Mercia. He stayed with him and refused to give him up for that long. The grandson approached his grandfather and hugged him, then asked him about the grandmother. Then Nicodem told him that she had died 3 months after finding him. When he heard the whole story, Evan became very excited to meet his friend, who protected him for that long and was approaching him as he went daily to the forest to meet him there.
Thanks for watching. Please like and share the video in social networks. We'll be right back to you as fast as we can.